Rune Giant in a nutshell. Rune Giant will be the next epic card coming to Clash Royale. You can find it in the jungle arena unless they decide to randomly change that before the update. The stats show that she's kind of similar to the Giant as a general idea, like she only goes for buildings, ignoring any troops on her way. And the sight range is the exact same as all the Giant cards we have in the game. The HP is significantly high for a 4 elixir card. She is almost as tanky as a Royal Giant. The ability she has is very interesting though. As you can see, it gives a unique buff to the other troops, and she can buff 2 of them at the exact same time. It doesn't work on buildings, and I know some expo players will cry about that once they see how the ability works. The buff will stay on your troops as long as she is alive, so if she dies, the buffs will go away. But if the buffed troop ends up dying, she will buff another troop, no problem here. There is a cooldown on the ability. It's short and not a massive issue, but it's still quite noticeable. If she was already deployed and you played a troop, then shortly after played another troop, she would have to do the animation twice. In most cases, that wouldn't matter, but if you are pushing with it, slowing it down this way on the enemy side might not be a good idea. Worst case, if you don't want to waste the ability and want to use the buff she gives, you can drop 2 cards at the same time. The way she picks which troops she buffs is based on the closest troops to her. As you can see here, she gave the buff to the 2 recruits on the right. But if I deploy her in the middle of the recruits, she will buff 1 on each side. The range on her ability is 7 tiles, which is insane because you can buff cards nearly from your bridge. This will allow you to split lane push with a buff on each side, but I have no clue how effective that would be in a real game. This buff would make it so the buffed troops get bonus damage every 3 attacks, so basically it'll be normal attack, and then a buffed attack, repeating this indefinitely. Think of it like the attack from the monk where he gets a push every 3rd hit. It's kinda funny how the push aligns with the buff, not gonna lie. The buff damage is a static number, so the 220 that a skeleton got will be a 220 on a P.E.K.K.A. as well. Anyone with 1 brain cell or more would immediately think of the troop with the highest attack speed in the game to abuse this ability on it. And you would be correct, it is significantly more useful on some cards than other cards. But what if I tell you that quick attacking troops are just surface level thinking and better ways to abuse this mechanic exist? First idea I had was testing splash damage, and it turns out the ability applies to all the troops getting splashed by your attacks. This is borderline insane, especially when used with Magic Archer to snipe towers, because getting 220 extra damage is like a free fireball on their tower. This works on Electro Dragon, where every 3rd attack is boosted and deals 220 damage to all 3 targets. The insanity doesn't stop at splash. Electro Wizard's attack count as a dual attack because he shoots once per hand. If you pair him with Rune Giant, Bro will be getting a bonus attack 2 times every 3rd attack instead of 1 time every 3 attacks. And you don't have to get your E-Wiz targeting 2 troops at the same time, because even if he is targeting 1 troop, it still counts as 2 attacks. Does it stop here? Well, of course not, because with Ram Rider being 2 units in 1, the buff actually works on the snares, making the Ram Rider very dangerous, but it also works on the Ram itself, giving you a ton more damage on towers. Goblin Giant is also a multi-unit in 1. To be specific, it's a 3 unit in 1, so the buff will apply on both Spear Goblins, giving you 440 extra damage every 3 hits from them, which will melt everything in sight, and the punches from the Goblin Giant himself will also get you bonus damage, so yay, free tower damage. Buckle up, it's about to get more crazy with Firecracker, because for some godforsaken reason, the 3rd hit she does gets over 1000 extra bonus damage. The reason is actually because when the attack splits like this, the bonus damage is applied on each one of these small rockets. So even if you manage to hit the tower with one of these smaller attacks, it will still feel like a ridiculous amount of damage. Hunter works the exact same way, and it's very goofy because after 2 normal attacks, the damage will apply on all 10 bullets he shoots, which makes up for some very scary clips. A few notes about this ability. Charging attacks do count as normal attacks, so if a prince hits a charge, he will get his buff after 2 regular attacks. This applies to the Bandit Dash and the Mega Knight Jump, as they do follow the same logic. And it goes both ways, so if a Mega Knight does 2 normal attacks and then jumps, the jump will get the bonus damage. It does make for cool interactions with Golden Knight's ability, where he will get the bonus damage every third troop he hits with his chain. Electro Spirit, although works just like him, it doesn't get buffed because it dies when it jumps, so the buff goes away. Also, the ability seems to not work on the effects of the attacks themselves. So just like the Firecracker's Trail, the poison from the Evo Dart Goblin and the Evo Valkyrie's Nado doesn't see any buffs, which is honestly a good thing. Like, can you imagine how insane Electro Giant would be with the extra reflected damage? Not to say it doesn't work on any Evo though, because Musketeer's Sniper Shot do count as regular attacks, so she can deal extra damage on the third bullet. And it works on the Evo E-Drag, where every third bounce from the Infinite Chain will be a buffed attack, as if this thing deserved an indirect buff. Like, don't get me even started on how it never got nerfed to begin with. Evolved Battle Ram seemed to not work at first, regardless of how many troops it hit, but I got this idea of triggering the buff, making it hit 2 buildings first, and guess what? It actually ended up working, although this one I do have a feeling is not intended. A cloned Rune Giant can buff units as well, but it's kinda useless because it will exchange buffs with the regular one and you will still be capped at 2 buffs anyway. And also it's easy to take out that the buff can be removed without much problems. Mirror is kind of the same situation, except you can choose where to deploy it and sandwich a bunch of troops so the buffs aren't all wasted. Fun fact, if any troop, let's say this mini P.E.K.K.A, got 2 hits with a buff and then they killed the Rune Giant that buffed him and you placed another one, the buff doesn't carry over and he will still need 2 attacks before his third one gets buffed. I personally believe she will be borderline broken in Lava Hound decks because the Lava Hound easily gets like 10 hits on tower, so that's an easy 600 plus damage for 4 elixir. It also synergizes very well with Electro Dragon and Flying Machine, which both are very annoying to take out. Balloon and Skeleton Dragons kinda suck with it, so it will probably replace Balloon instead of being a part of the Lava Loon decks. But she actually does really great with Miner, so Lava Miner Rune Giant might become meta next season because you can buff both your Lava Hound and Miner. Oh, and on topic of Miner, the fact that the 220 damage doesn't get Crown Tower reduction is insane if I'm being honest, especially since she does well tanking for a Miner herself. And Magic Archer working so well with it is another excuse to throw it in that Miner Wall Breakers deck that people play. Also, she isn't entirely useless on defense, as you can use it to kite troops and buff your troops to deal more damage to them. Or you can just use it to soak some hits and again buff your defensive troops to deal with the pushes much better. But you might want to get rid of Wall Breakers because they kind of waste the buff for no reason. Just play Miner Magic Archer alone. It will be enough, trust me. She will be amazing with Goblin Giant decks, probably as a Sparky replacement. The synergy she has with Goblin Giant is nuts, and cards like Dark Prince will get crazy value with the buff combined with their splash damage. And I can see it working for some Hog Rider Firecracker decks, but I think this will be a niche one because Firecracker will be killed way before she gets its buffed attack. Countering it is kind of straightforward because it basically is a giant, so any high DPS unit should take care of it. Just have a bit more freedom in a sense where if you see she buffed some random skeletons for your opponent, you could hold off your zap so the buff doesn't transfer to their Little Prince. For the King activation, it's practically impossible to pull it with Tornado alone because she's just too heavy, like the Giant. There is an exception if they deployed it in the inner side of the arena, like behind the King Tower, as you can push it by deploying a Spirit on top of it and then pull it with a Nado, which would be enough to get you a King Tower activation. Fisherman works regardless of which tile they played her in, and it doesn't matter what tower you're using because she's very tanky. She will survive long enough to get that one hit on the King Tower. And here's a look at the new beautiful arena that will probably get removed from Path of Legends in a week because people will be complaining about it being too distracting since this community just hates fun. Also, very sad, there is no new music. I'm gonna be honest here, this card is so goofy. I had a feeling half of these interactions were not even intended, but we asked the devs directly and we were told that they aren't bugs, my dudes.